online. My name is Jordan. If you're new here, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and I hope you enjoy the service. See you guys.
Alright, so my top 3 favorite artists. This is a very tricky one because music is very subjective, and I will admit my list doesn't always stay this way, but right now, just based on a somewhat overall perspective, I would have to say my favorite artists right now are Kanye West. And let me just say, he currently holds the album of the decade right now by many musician opinions. So Kanye West, Kendrick Lamar, he dropped 3 classic albums all in a span of less than 9 years. I believe that is so phenomenal. And the one, the only, ladies and gentlemen, the greatest, in my opinion, arguably the greatest musician of all time, Michael frickin' Jackson. So that is my picks for my favorite artist of all time for now. Thank you.
My favorite artist would have to be definitely the legend herself, Jennifer Hudson, John Mayer, and the one, the only Mr. Stevie Wonder. Come on guys, that's the obvious choice.
Alright, cool. Top 3 artists. To no surprise, these are all the hip hop guys. I'm gonna have to go with Lecrae. If you don't know Lecrae, maybe you don't listen to much Christian hip hop in the last 10 years. He's the guy with the rhymes. He's the guy with the big testimonial type songs. Lecrae, he put Christian hip hop on the map basically. And then let's go a bit, maybe just before Lecrae, Lupe Fiasco, the lyrical genius. He won that award actually on Genius.com. Lyrical genius, trickiness, Mr. Kick, push. The most lyrical rapper I think I've heard, period. And then let's go with another artist I'm listening to again. This guy mixes hip hop and classical Christian worship. Amazing. And that guy's name is KB. And yeah, those are my 3 artists.
Staan vandag so stysende voor my, met 'n vuur hier in my hart vir U. Deur al die eeue heen is U naam besing, en saam met engele wil ek ook nou iets bring. Maar hier moet ek begin waardeer. Alles vir my. U is die lied hier op my lippe. U is die naam wat ek bely. Alles vir my, U is die lied hier op my lippe, U is die naam wat ek bely. U is alles vir my, U is my begin, U is my einde, U is my weg, U is my lewe, U is alles vir my, en U is genoeg.
Welcome Every Nation Amped Youth to the week 5 of the GOAT list. Today I'm here to talk to you about Sarah. Many of you may be surprised that she made it into the GOAT list or the Hebrews Hall of Fame. Many of you don't know her outside of her role of being a wife to Abraham. But do we truly know what happened to Sarah in the Bible? Do we truly know her story, what she's been through? Do you know, most of us know about the covenant that God made with Abraham to give him more descendants than there are stars in the sky. But did you know that that covenant extended to Sarah? And in the Bible, in Genesis 17, verse 15 to 16, it says, God also said to Abraham, as for Sarai, which was Sarah's name before she was named Sarah, your wife, you are no longer called to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will become the mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her. So I just want to highlight the portion of scripture says, and she will be mothers of nations. Wow, that is such a big calling. And can you take a second and imagine if God had said to you, you will be mother or father of nations? I mean, that's a pretty daunting, especially in a time where women were seen as inferior and less than to men. It's unheard of that a woman would have such a huge calling. But God calls women. God called Sarah and he gave her a purpose and a destiny. Not only did he give her a destiny, he gave her an identity. He renamed her to call her Sarah, which means princess. God is the one that gave her a new identity, restored her into him. So God doesn't just give us a destiny, he gives us an identity. He confirms who we are and how he sees us, not how the world sees us. Because if the world were to judge Sarah by the standards of society in that age, she shouldn't have been given such a purpose. But God doesn't see us as the world does. He sees us as we were meant to be seen through his eyes. And he calls us wonderfully and beautifully made. And so that's just an example about how God took someone in the Bible and gave them a completely new identity. So I want to ask you, what has God called you to do? It might be something small or something big. No roles are small or big. It might seem small, but you don't know what the purpose God has for you in the kingdom. And sometimes it seems a bit intimidating. I mean, if God told you such a big purpose like he gave Sarah, would you feel intimidated? I know I would. I would feel like, God, I'm just Janelle. How can you expect me to be someone so huge and so important? Because Sarah was an important figure in the Bible. And we'll later see how she helped Abraham in this amazing covenant that God gave her. But you know what? Sarah believed in the promise that God gave her. At first, she held on to this promise like a lifeline, and she says, I know that I'm not seeing this at the moment, but God promised me children. And at this time, she was barren. She hadn't had any children. And at the age of 90, she still hadn't had any children. And you know what? Sarah started to lose hope. She started to lose hope in herself and the promise that God had given her. And she thought, you know, I'm 90 years old. Who at 90 will have a child? And I know back then, people lived a lot longer, but that was still unheard of to be at that age and have a child. So Sarah lost hope, and I'm pretty sure if we were put into that situation, we would also feel a little bit hopeless. And I want to ask you, do you have situations in your life right now that you're dealing with that seems just a little bit hopeless? That seems like I'm this far in my life and I still haven't accomplished this. Am I ever going to accomplish this? Or I'm this young, could I ever accomplish something that I've been given? And it's easy to lose hope in circumstances where everything is telling us that we can't. But we serve a God of the impossible. And we also serve a God who remembers, not only remembers, but keeps his promise. In Genesis 18, we see that three men came to Abraham and Sarah, and God sent them, and God came to them in the form of three men, and they told Abraham that in a year Sarah would conceive a child. And Sarah laughed, because, I mean, can you think? I'm 90 years old, I'm going to receive a child? I mean, I think I would laugh too in that situation. And Abraham had to remind her to have faith. And God showed up. God kept his promise. God reminded her of the covenant he had made with her. Because surely a year later, she conceived a child, and they named him Isaac. And they said Sarah was overjoyed. In Genesis 21, verse 67, it says, "And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me." And she said, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age." See, what God did for Sarah was impossible. Medically, logically, everything about it seemed impossible. But we serve a God that is the impossible. He does the impossible. And as Christians, we are called to believe in this amazing God of the impossible. We are called to have this enormous faith that believes in the impossible. And we love to quote the scripture from Hebrews 11, verse 1, saying, "Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not yet seen." But I want to ask, do we truly have that faith? That faith that denies the possible, the logical, the probable, that faith that sees that mountain and says, I understand that nobody has been able to move this mountain and logically it's impossible, but I serve a God who created the mountain. So therefore, why should it not move if I am in him? Do we have that faith? And it's quite possible to kind of lose that faith in situations when it seems like there is no hope, especially with this coronavirus and everything happening in the world. We're kind of like, where does our faith come from? And if we realize our faith comes from the same God that gave a woman of 90-year-old a child, we serve that same God. And he can do miracles, the same miracles that he did back then, he still does them today if we have that faith. So I don't know what you were trusting for today. Maybe it is a broken relationship that needs healing, or it's a school subject that you're just not understanding, or maybe it's a test that's really just stressing you out. Or maybe, like Sarah, you have this big calling from God that you feel completely unequipped and inferior to handle. And I want to tell you today that yes, God gives us our calling, but God does not give us our calling without equipping us to fulfill that calling. Sarah didn't have a child by her own merits, by her own body. God made that miracle happen. And God didn't choose Sarah to be this great example because she was perfect or because she was so righteous and so put together. Sarah was not perfect. Sarah was a person of jealousy. And we see this later on in the story, even after Isaac was born. Sarah became jealous of a son that Abraham had conceived with a servant called Hagar. She was jealous of the son called Ishmael, and she asked Abraham to cast Hagar and Ishmael out of the house because she wanted Isaac to be the one true heir of Abraham. And Abraham did what his wife asked him to, and he sent out Hagar and Ishmael. And we see that Sarah is a woman of jealousy and brokenness, and even after she got her miracle, even after God fulfilled the desires of her heart, she was not content with that. And so God didn't choose Sarah because she was so perfect and deserved a miracle. She didn't. But the amazing thing about God is God redeemed that story. Even after Hagar and Ishmael went into the wilderness, God spoke to Hagar and said, "Do not worry, I have covered you, and I will make Ishmael into a great nation." God redeemed them, and God redeemed Sarah and Abraham as well, because God doesn't need your perfection to move miracles. God is the God of power. He doesn't need us to come to Him all put together, our lives together, no sin, because nobody is like that. God restores people, God redeems people to His purpose and to the calling that He has given you. It is not in your strength that you fulfill your calling. Abraham, Sarah's wife, he wasn't perfect either. We see many times that Abraham actually wronged Sarah amongst his many faults, and he was a righteous man of the Bible. He was a man close to God's heart, but he wasn't perfect either. We see many times during their travels, Abraham actually told Sarah to call him her brother, and that Abraham would call Sarah his sister. And the reason for this was Sarah was a beautiful, beautiful woman. And when they would travel, she would catch the attention of important and powerful men. And Abraham was afraid that they would kill him to take Sarah as their own. So he would call her, they would call themselves relatives to spare Abraham. And you have to understand at this time, a woman didn't have the voice or the right to negate the will of a man. So she had to go along with this. And we see two instances where a man actually took Sarah as his own away from Abraham, and Abraham let that happen. But God protected Sarah. Even in this instance, we see when Abimelech took her away as his own, God spoke to him and he convicted him and said, Sarah is actually married. So when Abimelech took Sarah back to Abraham, he convicted Abraham of his deceit and said that I will not take a woman that is another man's wife. But the thing is about the story is even though it is a horrible story, God restored Abraham and Sarah. He restored Abraham, the person who did the wrong, and he restored Sarah, the victim of her husband's deceit. He restored them both to places where they would be legends, where they would make the goat list, where they would be called men and women of righteous faith. And I don't know about you, but if you hear the backstories of these people, you kind of wonder how on earth did God use them in their brokenness, in their wickedness, in their pain. But the thing is, God doesn't need a perfect man or woman to use them to do mighty things. He just needs a heart that is willing and seeking Him. The power of God is to redeem. That is why He can use anyone He desires to do this. This is why you can be in the goat list. You can be in the goat list of faith. You can have this amazing faith, as broken or as hurting as you could be. Even if you go through life and things happen to you or you do wrong things, God can still use you, because it isn't your good works that enables you to be great. It is God's grace and His redemption power that qualifies you for greatness. Do not let anybody tell you that you cannot make the goat list of faith because of your age, of your gender, your background, or anything that you have done. Your past does not disqualify you from sharing the gospel, from being an ambassador of Christ. We have as much right to make it into the goat list as any one of these amazing figures in the Bible, because we serve the same God. So I want to tell you today that no matter what your past is, you can make it into the hall of fame, the hall of faith, because God is on your side. God is there. And in conclusion, I want to say we serve a God who sees us. God sees you and I, and He knows our name. He calls us by name. He gives us a calling, an identity, and a purpose. And not only does He give us that purpose, He equips us. He redeems and restores us in order to fulfill that purpose. Our God remembers and keeps His promises, and He is a God of the impossible.